Welcome to the TalentGrow Show, where you can get actionable, results-oriented insight and advice on how to take your leadership, communication, and people skills to the next level and become the kind of leader people want to follow. And now, your host and leadership development strategist, Halelly Azulay.
Welcome back. I'm Halelly Azulay, your leadership development strategist here at the TalentGrow Show, where we focus on how to make you the kind of leader people want to follow. And this week's guest is a great thinker, researcher, and writer, Jeff Annello, who is one of the brilliant minds behind Farnam Street, which is a newsletter and website that I follow religiously to get lots and lots of very good food for thought that I then share with my network. So you probably have read some of the things that I've shared if you follow me on social media. And something that I focus on with Jeff in this episode is decision making. This is really important to all of us, of course, no matter where you are in your career, the type of job you have, or the level that you're at. Decision making can really make a huge difference in your ability to be successful. So Jeff talks about what he thinks makes for efficient and effective decision making, and some of the thinking errors and biases that we all have as humans, and how we can become more aware of them and, more importantly, fight against them so that our decisions become better quality decisions. And we also talk about implications for leaders, specifically when you're leading a team and you're trying to make a decision. What are some of the things that might get in your way, and how you can leverage this information and this insight to make better decisions for your team and to help your team make better decisions. And finally, as we do with every episode of the TalentGrow Show, Jeff leaves us with a very actionable suggestion that, if you implement, can take you to the next level in terms of your decision-making effectiveness. So I hope you'll enjoy this episode, and I thank you for tuning in. And without further ado, here we go, Jeff Annello on the TalentGrow Show. Welcome back. I'm Halelly Azulay, your leadership development strategist, and my guest today is Jeff Annello, who is the co-author of a website called Farnam Street. This is actually a website that I subscribe to and gain tons of value from every week, because they research and write very, very smart, interesting articles about a wide variety of subjects. So Jeff is a guy who spends most of his time studying, researching, and writing about wisdom, about setting goals, about making smart decisions. And I really look forward to our conversation today. Jeff, welcome to the TalentGrow Show, and thank you.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Excellent. So I always ask for a brief description of my guest's professional journey. How did you get to where you are today? Where have you been? Just to give us a little bit of background before we dive into the meat and potatoes of this conversation.
I would say journey is probably a good word for me. I went to the University of Connecticut, born and raised in Connecticut. I studied business, I studied finance and accounting pretty deeply. Before I started working with Shane, who is the founder of Farnam Street and a good friend of mine and partner, I had a financial background. I spent some time managing investments, and I spent some time as a financial analyst, but I was always deeply interested in the general wisdom aspect of. One thing I really liked about when I was doing investments was there's a lot that you need to know. It's a very broad set of mental skills that you need to do that job, and I was always very interested in it. So Farnam Street was a natural evolution for me. And now I spend, as you said before, I spend a lot of time reading and writing about wisdom and sort of the process of making better decisions and things like that. We use the phrase mental models at Farnam Street, but a mental model is basically just a mental tool that helps you understand some particular aspect of how the world really works. And I kind of liken it to like a plumber having tools. So there are some tools that are going to be needed on almost any job, like a hammer. And there are some very specialized tools you only need for some jobs, like an 1/8-inch Allen wrench or something like that. So, but you need all the tools and you need to know how to use them. And I think at Farnam Street, that's sort of our goal, is to help people broaden and deepen their toolbox and learn how to use the tools. So.
Yeah. And you do such a fantastic job. And I was telling you before when we talked about aligning for the show, that I learned about Farnam Street from an author and speaker that I greatly admire, Daniel Pink, who also has lots of really good information, and he seems to be able to kind of be this great curator. And one of the sources that he said was always on his list of reading was Farnham Street. So that's when I started following Farnham Street, and it's been super helpful to me. And so it's very interesting. So you moved from being more in the applied world of investing to kind of being an intellectual, I guess you could say, right? Like you're a professional intellectual.
Oh, that sounds horrible, but I hope not. But
No?
yeah, I think it's fair to say in a sense, and also, Shane and I are also running a business, and we do conferences and we build workshops and we build courses and things like that. And we're also running a business, and we enjoy running the business end of Farnham Street, and we're also over time, hoping to do more and more business. So in reality, I'm doing both, but I'm more on the intellectual side than I've ever been. And I like it that way. I like to read. I like to write. I like those things. I learned something when I was, I'm still young, but even when I was even younger, that I've always held with me, which is that you want to try to build a career doing things that you want to spend your time doing, like sort of that idea about the process being more important than the end goal. I don't really, personally, I have certain goals, but I don't really care where I get so much as that I enjoy the process of getting there, because life is the process. I mean, it literally is the process of getting somewhere. So, with Farnham Street and getting to work with Shane, who I love, I mean, it's hard for me to ask for anything better. So
that's awesome. You're smart and lucky that you understand that, because so many people are searching for some kind of pot at the end of the rainbow. And it is the happiness is the journey, and doing what you love is one of the best ways to be happy. So good for you. So in the course of your work and researching and writing, I know that one of the things you've focused on, and I've been reading your work, is decision-making. And I've been really curious about decision-making lately, especially, and thinking about how to share with my audience more tools to help them make better decisions. What do you think contributes to effective and efficient decision-making in general?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say that is, of all the stuff we write about at Farnham Street, that's probably the central thread that ties it all together, is really how does it all make it into practical reality? And I think an efficient decision maker is not like a chess player that has studied a lot of games and can very quickly call to mind other moves that have been made and what the best moves are very quickly. And just as importantly, and maybe even more importantly, is very quickly discarding unimportant information. So a chess player can see the very, very quickly, 2 or 3 moves that are going to be the best one. And the truth about, practical decision-making outside of the world of games is that quick and correct decisions, so fast and accurate, which is what we want. I mean, I don't know anybody that wants to make slower decisions that are good or fast decisions that are bad. We're really after quick and correct decisions. Those are really made by people with deep and wide experience in some particular domain that they're working in. Because decision-making in the moment of the decision actually happens very quickly. I don't know if people realize how quickly their intuition is flooding them. It's faster than you realize. And it's just one of those facts of life that your subconscious is acting much more quickly than your conscious brain. I'm not breaking any new ground by saying that, but I'm not sure everyone always realizes the implications of that. And there are definitely times we can slow the process down and make it more deliberate, but what we're really trying to do, honestly, this is my opinion, is training our intuition, and that really comes through deep and wide experience. But so my next point would be that there's always the debate about which are the more useful experiences, your own experiences or those of other people. And you hear people like digging trenches on either side of this thing. Well, the truth is that's a false choice, right? I mean, we all took algebra. Let's say A is a positive number and B is a positive number. Well, A and B together must be greater than A or B alone, right? I mean, that's just a mathematical truth. So if we can agree that learning from our own experiences is pretty useful, learning from others' experiences are pretty useful, obviously putting them together is going to be better, right? Mm-hmm. So the truth is that the experience that we need to make better decisions does not necessarily have to be our own. I like to give extreme examples. So my extreme example here is you don't need to get strung out on heroin to know that that's a bad idea. You've picked up the vicarious experience by seeing the world and studying other people. I mean, and this happens automatically. We do this, nature is pretty good in the sense that it's given us this system where we can pick up vicarious experience. So it is obviously true that that's useful. But I do think you can train yourself to be better at it, just like you can train yourself to be better at golf. I mean, you're not stuck with the swing that you were born with, and I don't think in terms of picking up other people's experience, you're stuck with what you're born with either, which is by and large pretty good. And then on the flip side, you have those cases that are reflected in the like Mark Twain quote, who says, a man who carries a cat by the tail learns something he can learn in no other way. And so there are things that need to be learned directly. Like if you plan to learn how to have sex by anything other than direct experience, I wish you great luck. It's just one of those things that has to be learned directly. So the truth is, most of reality is really a mix. We learn, like, for example, learning how to build successful relationships with people is absolutely a mix of studying others and observing others and learning from our own mistakes. And again, nature has been pretty good at giving us both systems, and we need both systems. So.
Very interesting. So let's talk a little more about this idea of training your intuition. And you mentioned, and I completely agree, and from what I've seen and what I've studied, we are often not even consciously aware that our intuition is telling us what to do. And sometimes we act on it without even that conscious awareness of any of that process. And so, of course, that often gets in the way of us making the best possible decisions because we're not using the rational part of our brain that has more capacity to take in more input and to really weigh things against, each other in a more objective way. So, but our intuition gives us really great information, like, you better not drag the cat by the tail. Like, you don't have to consciously think about it. Your intuition will take care of you if you just listen to it. So this dichotomy or this tension between following your gut or slowing down to make sure that you consider it rationally before acting from your gut. How do you suggest people do this thing you say, train your intuition?
For example, a book that got very popular is Malcolm Gladwell's Blink, and that's about that sort of those quick snap decisions. But the truth is that is happening when we make any decision. I mean, you develop an automatic feel. It's just that's just the way the brain works. Is that's happening very quickly. So I think what some of the best research that has come out, and the best even popularizing of that research too, has focused on the fact that there are certain types of decisions that we make well quickly and with our intuition. There are certain types of decisions that we don't make well with our intuition. And I think people have to start by understanding, A, the way the intuition works, but B, the different types of decisions that work well in either case. Because what the brain is basically doing is, it's just something that is frequently called the first conclusion bias, which is that the first and most obvious idea and solution that comes into your head tends to be the one that we think is right. So it just kind of gets in there, and then it's very hard to dislodge. And I think that what people have to train themselves to do is to first recognize what that first conclusion is. Like, what is just the first thing that came to my mind here, and why? And then give themselves a second to step back and say, is that actually the case? Is that actually the best decision? Is that actually the best solution? Just because it's the first one and the hardest one to decide does not mean it's the right one. And I think most people will automatically go through their lives never having any second thought about the first conclusion that comes into their head. Because they're like, well, my intuition is pretty good. And sometimes it is pretty good. You're walking down the street and you see a guy with a gun on the other side of the street. You don't need to sit there and be like, well, it's my first conclusion. You just run away. You just get out of there. And that is a case where your intuition is broadly very useful. And it tends to be a lot of physical situations, like that, actually physically and dangerous, things like that, our intuition is pretty damn good. And the reason why is natural selection working the way it does. People who didn't have very good intuition would have been weeded out a long time ago. So those types of things work well. But when we're deciding, how to make some larger, more deliberate decision, our intuition doesn't always work the way it should. And what it takes is developing this, we kind of call it like the two-track analysis. One, what is the best decision here? But two, what are the ways in which my brain is misleading me about one? What's happening in my brain that may be causing me to make the wrong decision.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of things. I mean, I can't give you one because, I think the first conclusion problem is a really, really important one, but there are many other ones. It just takes the will to go figure out what they are. And And Farnham Street, that's a lot of what we do is trying to talk about those things. So.
And there really are a lot of thinking errors that we have, right? So I know that you love following the work and the words, I guess, of Charlie Munger. And he mentioned 24 in a speech that he gave, 24 thinking mistakes. So what are some of these thinking mistakes that you think that, leaders and people everywhere need to become more aware of these thinking mistakes so that we can evaluate our decision making based on whether we're following the fallacies or logic. What are the first conclusion you just mentioned? What are a couple of the other ones that you think are really big?
Yeah. So what you're referring to is Charlie Munger had a speech called, it's actually 25, the 25 causes of human misjudgment. And yeah, it's brilliant. I recommend anybody listening to look it up. I try to read it at least once a year, but I've probably read it many more times than that. And
I'll link to it in the show notes. It is.
Yeah. Yep. We'll link to it. It's amazing. It's incredible. It's a great synthesis of the way, people make thinking errors, as you call them. So the first conclusion bias is a huge one. Another one I'll hit on is something that we would call narrow framing. So the way that you frame a decision basically determines the way you're going to make that decision. So, when you make a decision, you're maximizing for some parameter or another. So let's say I sit down for lunch. I decide to order a plate of French fries instead of a grilled chicken salad, which I know is better for me. Mm-hmm. In that moment, I'm maximizing for taste and I'm maximizing for those immediate good feelings and that feedback I get from eating French fries. I'm not maximizing for my long-term health, clearly. I mean, we know enough about, the research and so on about nutrition and health can be very contradictory and is not easy, but I'm confident that a grilled chicken salad is probably going to be better for me than a plate of French fries. And I don't think anybody listening to this is going to disagree with that. So, yes. So in that decision, in that moment, I've certainly maximized for something other than my health. So that's how I've framed that decision. So you think about leaders, I think that most leaders don't really stop and think about what their decisions are maximizing for. They are implicitly maximizing for something, but they haven't really thought about what it is. They're kind of like the boy at the bottom of a well who can only see the walls of the well and maybe the sky. The frame around them is limiting them. Their direct and vicarious experience, I was talking about before, it just isn't wide enough. And if it is wide enough, it's not being called to mind at the time that they need it to make a better decision. And so when you make decisions too narrowly, frequently you get hit with consequences that you didn't see. And it's almost like you made the decision with a blindfold on. And you kind of did. I mean, if you're the boy at the bottom of the well, you can't make very good worldly decisions because you just can't see the world around you. It's kind of like playing poker by thinking only about your own hand and not about the hands of the other people at the table, which is just as important, right? So that narrow framing problem, in addition to the first conclusion problem, those are two big ones that you see a lot, especially by leaders. And maybe as we go on, we'll talk a little bit more about those kinds of things. But yeah.
Okay. All right, good. Thank you. So if we're thinking about the listeners, many of them are already in a leadership role within an organization. They've got teams that they're responsible for. They're often not at the top of the organization, so they don't really call all the shots. They're kind of sandwiched in between and trying to make good decisions, and sometimes with limited options. So what do you think, based on the research that you've done, what are some of the ways that we can help these leaders help their teams reach the best possible decisions?
Yeah. So again, there's a lot there. So what I'll try to do is address the problem that I just brought up. So I'll try to solve my own problem, which is narrow framing.
Okay.
So we'll talk about two things, maybe one conceptual and one specific tool. So from a conceptual standpoint, so there's a rock song that I like. It's called "Voice of the Voiceless." So I like that term because I think what a lot of leaders need to do, and they need to do this for themselves, but they also need to help their groups do it, which is figuring out how to give a voice to the voiceless and honor it. And what I mean by that is that a lot of times we make decisions. All the decisions we make affect other people, but the problem is that we don't really think about the people that are being affected by the decision, right? And the specific tool is basically to think about, before you make a decision that impacts other people, is to actually sit there and in your head say, how would I feel, or what would I think if I was in the shoes of the person or people that would be affected by the decision? That seems like the oldest, that's probably the oldest reframing, we're talking about narrow framing. That's probably the oldest reframing trick in the book. But the problem is that nobody uses it. And the reason people don't use it is because it makes them very uncomfortable. Because when you really ask yourself that question, how will the people who will be affected by this decision feel about it? You start to realize that you would, if you took it seriously, you would make a lot of decisions in a different way. Let's just say you're the CEO of a company, for example, and you think that you're entitled to some gigantic stock options package. Okay. Now you may think that you're entitled to that, but if you actually sit there and think, who are the people affected by the decision? Well, all the people below you are affected by your massive compensation package, right? How will they feel about that? And how will that affect the company? And if you actually sat there and thought about it, I have to doubt that a lot of people would still want to take that same level of the same amount of stock options, but they do. I mean, a lot of them do, and I think that it's because they're more concerned with what they're entitled to than reframing the problem like the way I'm talking. So that's my point when I say it's uncomfortable. It changes the way you think about a lot of things. But the truth is that, like reality, we always like to say reality isn't the way you want it to be just because you want it to be like that. It doesn't accede to what you want. It just is what it is. So the reality of a decision like that is it's going to affect a lot of people, and it's going to affect the way the organization runs. Even if you want to put blinders on, that's what's happening. So, so basically, so there's this book, it's called It's Your Ship. And It's Your Ship is a book about a Navy captain who takes over the horribly performing ship and makes it the most productive in the whole fleet. And in his own words, what he tried to do was try to see the world through the eyes of his crew. Rather than being a captain dictating on from high, he tried to see the world through the eyes of his crew. And it's like learning how to play poker by finally understanding what other people's hands are rather than just your own hand. And so you ask what leaders can do to help their groups make better decisions. Well, I encourage them to get their teams thinking like this. Get them to talk about the people who are not in the room, whether it's the customer, the supplier, the regulator, the employees below them, the bosses above them. It doesn't really matter. It's just bring the people into the room who are silent. And I suspect that if you start really honoring that, then you'll do a better job seeing the world as it is rather than as you'd like it to be. So
cool. All right, good. Any other tools that you want to share with leaders for better decision making?
Well, there's a lot. I mean, again, there's a lot. I mean, I think there's so many. And I mean, another one I can, we'll just talk about briefly is there's always a problem of groupthink in any groups. It's a very there's a social aspect to a group decision making. So if it's just me, Jeff, making a decision, there are a lot of problems with people making decisions on their own. But then there are a whole nother set of issues that come with a group, and that's because human beings are social creatures, and we do things. There's also always a social drive behind the way we make decisions as a group. And I think, people are generally aware of this, but what I see is they don't act like it. They know it, but they don't act like they know it, which is another problem in and of itself. And the groupthink problem basically comes from, some idea comes out and frequently made by maybe the highest paid person in the room or the most important person in the room or whatever. And then the rest of the people in the room start, herding around that idea. And you lose any diversity of opinion, which a lot of times can create better decisions. Again, I don't think I'm breaking any ground by saying that, but I think leaders have to recognize the groupthink problem and understand why it happens. And the way you understand why that happens is by understanding people. It's just by understanding human nature as best as you can, and understanding that people make decisions in a lot of ways other than rationale, basic economic rationality. What's the best possible decision we could make now, dollars and cents wise? That's not the way people make. Sometimes it is, but more frequently it's made other ways. And for example, if a leader can come to understand that the lowest paid and optically least important person in the room is probably not going to contribute their opinion, then they might be able to take, and there's very, very deep and human reasons why that always happens. So if you actually want that person's opinion, you're going to have to start conducting your meetings and start conducting your organizations a little bit differently, So that's my point, where a lot of it starts with like trying to understand human nature and why it is that way, and learning how to act accordingly. So.
Okay, great. So what I'm hearing you say is that the more you recognize and become aware of these potential biases or thinking errors, the more that you can bring them into conscious awareness and actually test against them, to sort of measure your decision that you're leaning towards against these various metrics to say, am I doing this? Am I doing this? Am I doing this? Or maybe even bake into your process mitigating activities to help overcome or avoid some of the thinking errors. So for example, with groupthink, one of the things that I suggest sometimes when I'm facilitating a group brainstorming or a decision-making process is if you think that there are a couple of very vocal people that take the lead or cause the group to veer in a particular direction, one of the ways to overcome them that's relatively simple is to have people contribute their ideas anonymously or in a written form so that they're not impacted or informed in any way by what other people are saying, and that every person has a voice, whether they are more introverted or more extroverted, whether they are more dominant or more held back. And then you're working with all the ideas, and from there you can move forward with like a group discussion.
I think that's great. I mean, because all you're doing is just recognizing the way social dynamics work, and then how do we design a system that's better than that, Because what I see a lot of times is people complain and they'll say, well, I really wish that everybody in the room would speak up, or I really feel like I'm only hearing from a couple people or whatever. But they haven't stepped back to ask themselves, well, what am I doing to encourage that to happen?
Yes.
You can't just complain about it. You can't just wish. Again, it goes back to the thing that like the tough truth, which is the world just is what it is. People are who they are, and just because you want it to be a different way doesn't mean it will be. What are you actually doing to encourage that to be the case? And until you sort of get over yourself to a certain extent, you won't be able to do that. And the second step to what you're saying is, okay, now I have all this feedback. Am I going to actually use it? Will I take it seriously? Or am I just going to do what I was going to do anyways? I'm assuming you're a leader, and you're probably a leader because you've had strong opinions on things and you've been very successful at them in some way or another. But it's almost like the further you get up, you have to start taking your own opinions and your own thoughts a little less seriously and start pushing in the other direction to think about what other people are thinking. Again, it goes back to the framing thing I was talking about before. What are the other people feeling and thinking about this, and how do I take that seriously? Because you want to see all the hands at the table, not just your own.
Yeah, that's really crucial. I wrote a blog post about the CEO disease, which was a term coined by Daniel Goleman. And it's basically the higher up people go in the chain of command, the more that they tend to be surrounded by yes men, right? And yes women. And they don't get fed the information that they really need in order to make sure they don't make mistakes, because everybody around them, instead of saying, have you considered this, or this might not work because of that, they're just all sort of nodding their head and allowing this leader to potentially, confidently march right off a cliff.
Yeah, and so let's just say you're listening to this. You say, I think Halelly's right. I think Jeff's right. Absolutely, the yes men problem is an issue. Okay, well then tell me, what exactly are you going to do to solve that problem?
Yeah.
Like, how are you gonna just wanting it to go away won't work, And we talk a lot about being aware of these things, but awareness doesn't do anything. I mean, awareness is just awareness. Like, what are you actually going to do to solve that problem? How are you going to keep from yes men from surrounding you? Are you able to get over your ego in such a way that you'll have people around you who frequently do not agree with you?
Yes.
And who frequently come up with opinions that you would not have come up with, and that you don't always think are a good idea at first glance, first conclusion bias, right? Yeah. So that's the hardest part. That's there's always this thing, I call it transmission loss. It's like you have a very powerful engine, but none of it's getting to the wheels, and solving that problem is well, if you can solve it, you've made a huge leap. So.
Yeah. And it's not impossible. You're right. It's hard, but it's not impossible.
It's like learning how to play golf. You're just not born with the perfect Tiger Woods-esque swing. You have to work at it. And all this other stuff is true. You got to work at it, Right. I mean, I'm against 30-day cleanses. I'm against quick hits, the new thing or whatever. And the reason why is because none of it works. I mean, it may work for 30 days, but it's not about 30 days. Life is long, and what you need are very long habits that last forever. So.
Excellent. Good wisdom. Well, before we give give people one really specific action that they can take this week to improve their own decision-making skills, real quick, what's new and exciting on your horizon? What's got your attention these days?
All right, first I'm going to do a cop-out answer, then I'll give you a real answer. But my cop-out answer is that what's constantly exciting for me is that lifelong process of getting new tools in the toolbox. And just as importantly, which people don't like to do, and I don't like to do, but it has to be done, is throwing away old tools and getting new ones. And if a year goes by and you haven't thrown away some old tool and upgraded it, you're going to be like a plumber who's using the same tools he used 40 years ago, even though there's better stuff available now. I mean, you have to constantly be figuring out, like, what are my tools that aren't? And the only question you're asking, like the core end of the day thing you're asking yourself is, does the world really work this way or not? You know, not do I wish it works this way, not would it make sense that it worked this way or whatever. Is this actually what's happening? You know, I got that idea from Richard Feynman, who's a physicist, who basically said, you know, people are always interested in, is it possible? You know, like when they're going after mystical, let's just say we're trying to figure out mind reading, you know, people are always interested. Like, is it possible? Richard, is it possible? He goes, yes, it's possible, but there are billions of things that are possible that are not actually happening. That's not what we're interested in. It's not what's possible, is what is actually happening. You know? And so I think that process of like trying to figure out, wrap your head around the way the world actually works, that's exciting to me, you know?
Yeah. Well, I was just going to sort of paraphrase to say, stay curious, you know, and keep upgrading.
Yeah, keep upgrading, keep realizing you're probably deeply ignorant about something, you know? I forget the exact quote, but Will Rogers had a quote. It's like, we're all ignorant just about different things, you know? Yeah. And so that's my kind of cop-out answer, I guess. But I guess, you know, my real answer would be that I lately have been studying the human memory a lot, and that's been very interesting. All the little quirks and failings and advantages and why the memory works the way it does and stuff like that, I find very interesting. And we've had some stuff about on Farnham Street, and I suspect we'll have more in the future.
All right. Oh, good. I'd look forward to reading about it. Who's top of mind in terms of the research? Like, what's most impressive in terms of the memory research? Who is?
The guy who I like the most, and I've been reading about a lot, his name is Daniel Schachter. He's a psychologist at Harvard. He runs like the Harvard Memory Lab, and I think he's got a lot of great insights. And I found him through another thing that a lot of what we do with Farnham Street, and people ask us a question a lot, like, well, how do you guys come across all this stuff? And honestly, it's just one thing builds on the other thing. Yeah. And so the memory thing came from studying the development of human personality, which we wrote about a bit. And she used some of his research to do her work. And that's a lot of it, what it is. You're just kind of like pulling a thread. You know? Cool.
Following the breadcrumbs on the great interwebs.
That's it.
All right. So let's, before we wrap up, what's something really concrete, really specific that people can do that can immediately begin to upgrade their decision-making skills?
Sure. I strongly recommend that people start keeping what I call a decision journal. So a decision journal, I think where people get a little bit in trouble with the idea, and hopefully we'll head it off in the past here, is they want to record too much stuff. But basically a decision journal is something where you can start writing down the parameters by which you're making important decisions, and doing it when the information is fresh. What's the decision I'm making and why? And what do I think the outcome will be? Broadly speaking, what do I think is going to happen? So this allows you to do two things. The first thing it allows you to do is start making all those frames explicit. To start pulling them out a little bit. You'll start seeing the degree to which you're only feeling, it's like the blind man and the elephant. Like you need to start seeing the degree to which you're kind of only feeling a part of the elephant. And I think when you start recording your big decisions, important decisions, and why you're making them, you kind of make some of that explicit and less in the subconscious, more in the conscious, maybe call it that. And the other thing that allows you to do is create a document that you can revisit over time. And what this document helps you do is overcome another set of biases, one of which is hindsight biases. We're very favorable to ourselves in hindsight a lot of times. And it allows you to alleviate some of the transience of your memory. So, your memory fades over time. When it fades, it changes. And every time we pull up a memory, we tend to change it slightly. Not like a computer where it's just exact replicas come up. So what you'll find with that document is as you go back to things, decisions you've made in the past, you may have thought you did it for some reason or another. You may have thought, your decision was something else than it actually was. And going back and seeing those things, again, this is like helping you get the reps. I was talking at the beginning, directing vicarious experience, making it wider and deeper. I think that's one way that you can do it.
Love it. That's a great and very, very specific, actionable tip. So thank you for that, Jeff. I appreciate it. How can people stay in touch with you, learn more about you, and learn more from you?
Well, they can go to the site, Farnham Street, Farnam. I'll have you post a link for me. And I think that people might want to start. We have a tab on that we call Best Articles. It's got a lot of, some of our best stuff. The other tab that's really good is Mental Models. Start digging into what those are and start start filling out your toolbox a little bit. And then most importantly, there's a box at the top that allows you to subscribe to our Sunday newsletter, which I think is, that's the way most people follow us. And I think probably the best way to do it. It's the way you can keep up with the stuff we're writing about. And we'll recommend other articles we found interesting that week and books and things like that. So I would definitely recommend that.
I second that recommendation. It is such a fantastic resource.
Awesome. And as far as me personally, I have a Twitter handle. It's @Mungerisms, MUNGERISMS. I'll have you post a link to that too. Yeah. There's also @Farnham Street. Shane runs that one. And that's probably good. And then I could probably have you post my email address if anybody wants to send me an email. All right.
Very good. Well, I appreciate your insights and sharing them with us. And I hope that folks will take you up on that specific action you suggested, but also just in general, begin to be more active participants in their own upgrading of their decision-making. Jeff, I hope you have a really great week, and thank you again for your time.
Thank you.
Take care. So have you experienced any of those decision-making biases or mistakes that Jeff mentioned? I know I certainly have. And it makes decision-making so tricky. And so many times we know what we're supposed to do, and then something else happens. So hopefully this tooled you up for more awareness and, more importantly, more action to make better quality decisions faster. And leave me a comment about some experience you've had with faulty thinking in terms of the decision-making that you've tried to do, or where maybe you've experienced some great ways to overcome some of those biases. That way you can share your knowledge with others and get the conversation going. So that's over on the show notes page at www.talentgrow.com/podcast/episode 37. That's also where you can grab that free tool that I sometimes mention. I've created it for you, the listeners of this podcast. And if you haven't grabbed it yet, please go get it. It's free. You just put in your email address, and that way you will get a download of the 10 mistakes leaders make and how to overcome them, as well as my biweekly newsletter, which is always very short, upbeat, fun to receive, useful, and easy to unsubscribe from if you don't like it. And iTunes is the place where you can leave a rating and a review. And so I hope you'll take a couple of minutes to do that. It really is very quick, and it helps me so much. And share this episode with a couple of other people that might also benefit from thinking about their decision-making and making better decisions. My goodness, if we can get more people around this globe to make better decisions, it'll be a better world. So that's my goal, making the world better, giving people new skills that they can use. And I appreciate that you've stuck around till the end. Thank you for listening to the Talent Grow Show. I'm Halelly Azulay. I'm your leadership development strategist, and I'm really grateful to you. Hey, make today great. Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Talent Grow Show, where we help you develop your talent to become the kind of leader that people want to follow. For more information, visit talentgrow.com.